SAP 5X might be the boldest pivot since R3. And if it lands, it won't just change the software, it will change the entire ERP economy. Today on the ERP Perspective, we're joined by Alisdair Bach, an SAP practice founder and program turnaround director and Dragon ERP, a leader who's been on the front line of large-scale SAP transformations and isn't afraid to call the next play. Alisdair says the old era of rip and replace is over, Brownfield rises, and the only credible path to SAP's 5X vision is the Omniverse, a connected modular fabric that lets legacy, current, and future SAP landscapes work as one. With AI and robotic agents orchestrating value every day, not just at go live, he's also predicting a power shift with less big system integrator monopoly, more boutique specialists delivering tighter outcomes faster. And his mantra for the new operating model, tactical is the new strategic. Move in smart increments, compound wins, and let the metrics, not the slideware, do the talking. If you lead in SAP, or if your future depends on it, this conversation is your field guide to what's next. The Omniverse, AI agents, Brownfield done right, and how to turn orchestration into measurable business performance. I'm George Collier. This is the ERP Perspective, and our episode on SAP 5X and the Omniverse. Let's get started. Good afternoon, Alisdair. How are you?
Yeah, really good, George. An interesting time to be in a SAP ecosystem.
Definitely. As I know, we've been speaking for a couple of weeks now regarding different topics around SAP, obviously 5X and obviously the Omniverse as well. But I wanted you to come on today, obviously talk about Dragon ERP, your experience. So I think it's best to start, can you tell the audience sort of your background within SAP and what brought you to being the founder of Dragon ERP?
Yeah, so I've been in the ecosystem for 35 years. So I came from a consultancy background with McKinsey. And so I started off back in the 90s working across the big old global SAP customers, people like WorldCom, Global Crossing. Their big names have all gone now. Working across telco and defense. And that was the beginning of globalization. So we started to see R2 and R3 going from local instances to regional instances to global instances. And I've worked across lots of the global 2000s. I've worked across most of the big consultancies, sort of like 50-50 split between consulting and customer sides. Back in the late 90s, beginning of the noughties, I worked to the side of a consultancy called Axon. And Axon were very much the big SAP SI at the time. You didn't have all the Indian SIs. You didn't have the other big SIs on board. There was no sort of like Accenture or Deloitte. All those people hadn't piled in. So Axon were a really big SAP SI who defined how to deliver SAP really well. Scale for large global 2000 customers. So most of the global 2000, that's like, was it 92% of the global 2000 or on SAP? The bulk of those would have been implemented by Axon. And Axon just had a really good methodology for implementing SAP, which is all based around the target operating model. The SAP is not technology. It's a best-of-breed target operating model, which any organization should be able to orchestrate. And they used to do things really, really well. And what they laid down back then still resonates today. And as time has moved on, more and more consultancies and players have got into the SAP ecosystem. SAP's become slightly more complex, but not particularly so. I just felt there was a need to go back to some real basics. So a few years ago, decided that most of the big SAP SIs were talking out their arse. And there was a need to go back to implementing SAP for the right reasons, which is to deliver customer outcomes, to deliver on time, on budget, to quality, and to focus on the operating model, because it's all about the business operating model. It's not about tech at all. And so that's the essence, really. It's all about for me, it's about the operating model. For me, the passion's about enabling organizations to drive themselves forward, leveraging SAP. And SAP is fantastic for that, as we know.
Fantastic. I mean, it looks like you've had a lot of success with Dragon ERP. A lot of people follow your blogs and your posts around different SAP topics. Yeah. I mean, what value does Dragon ERP bring to the community, and what do you think? Why do people come to Dragon ERP?
I think because SAP are a software vendor, ultimately. The type of software they sell changes, and it's changed over the last 50 years, but ultimately SAP are a software vendor, and their only rationale for existence is to make money for themselves and for their institutional investors. They're not your mate. They're not the customer's mate. They're there to drive revenue. And the purpose of Dragon ERP is to ensure that the customer gets what they need from their SAP investment. So it's about maximizing the customer's investment in SAP, ensuring that the customer drives value. So when we say value, we really mean good process orchestration, good productivity, the ability to be able to, take orders, to be able to manufacture, to be able to ship, to be able to raise POs, to be able to pay suppliers, to be able to pay staff, to be able to close within 2 to 3 days, just the normal stuff. But to really be able to operate the business really effectively, but to also act as that foundation for continuous improvement. So I always talk about the fact that SAP is not tech, right? It's a target operating model. Most organizations have been digitalized for the last 50 years. So we stopped using the term digital. It's just pointless, right? All organizations are digitalized. Okay, we don't talk about the cloud because cloud's just the means of hosting. Who cares, right? What we really focus on is the value. Okay, SAP is a foundation to drive business value and to enable organizations to move forward with KZAB, constant continuous improvement. Those really big successful the global 2000 and the sort of like the 30,000 below that, they gain value from SAP because they can drive continuous improvement. What they don't want is rip it out and start again. They want continuous improvement. These are savvy customers. They've got strategies. They know where they want to be. They navigate the perma crisis. They want to be able to be agile and nimble. They want to be able to do good continuous improvement. So that's what Dragon ERP brings to the party. We say every customer's journey is different with SAP. Everybody's required outcomes are different, and we tailor. Okay, then we make sure that the customer gets what they need from SAP. Yeah. Ultimately, SAP are a vendor, a software provider. Okay, they don't dictate the terms, the customer does.
100%. And alongside being the founder of Dragon ERP, you're also a program turnaround director as well. You help businesses in all types of situations. But I know you come in and you also act as that sort of turnaround director. What have you done recently on those topics?
Well, yeah. So I think we've spent a lifetime delivering SAP. Okay, so across most industry sectors. So you fail, you have successes, you learn. Certainly for the last 15 years, I've just been doing turnaround. So big global automotives like Jaguar Land Rover, big global farmers like Mundi Pharma, very large, sort of like Global 500 recently. So essentially, the name of the game is to be able to hit the ground running very, very quickly and to be able to, through a sixth sense, really understand what's really going on in terms of why is the customer in distress. Okay, invariably, it's got nothing to do with SAP or SAP software. So SAP's never the issue per se. We never really find a problem with SAP. So there are a load of issues. Got to a point now where I've got my own sort of like AI assurance model and diagnostic where I'm able to really go through very, very quickly and interrogate artifacts and documentation. But there are things I just look for constantly in terms of why a program's struggling, and that's why I've started writing a lot of content, which is not around 70% of SAP programs fail and all that dross. They don't fail. 70% of SAP programs struggle when they get to UAT. Most of them have a wobble, okay, and then fix themselves and move on. Most SAP programs do deliver in the end, okay. A few deliver minimum viable product, which is not a success, but most do deliver. Most have a wobble. So the failure points are the same wherever you go. So there's fractals in terms of failures, but a lot of it's to do with psychology. So I've started putting out a lot of posts about the psychology of failure because you could be very obtuse and just say, well, 70% of programs fail because the SROs don't empower or there's no boardroom empowerment or rubbish. Absolute rubbish. Or some say, well, SAP programs fail because of the SI. No SI ever starts a program looking to fail. Just to be really clear. SIs don't rock up looking to fail. There are loads of reasons why SIs fail, but a good turnaround consultant can work with an SI, upskill them and get them back into the game. You want to upcycle your SI. There's no point ditching an SI halfway through. Work out why they're failing and do something about it. So I've started writing a lot of stuff about the psychology of failure.
Yeah.
Getting into the real detail of failure. Because any idiot can say 70% programs fail and you need to fix X, Y, and Z, or you need a test strategy, intonation strategy, or data migrations where you need to focus on. Well, any fool can say that. Okay, but it doesn't mean you know how to go and fix it. So I've been really focusing on some of the deep issues around failure, some of the psychological issues around failure, some of the people issues around failure. I think when you're talking about a transformation program, because SAP is business transformation, right? So when you're talking about a business transformation program and you're investing to like 20, 50, 100 million pounds on a complex program, you're going to have problems during that program. So you just got to be a realist. There are going to be problems. And it's about the customer's maturity, about identifying those problems early on and being able to fix them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
Because there's absolutely no shame in having a wobbly program. There's loads of reasons why it might be wobbling, but it's the ability to get in quick and be able to turn it around very, very quick. And invariably, I can hit the ground and within 10 days have sort of like a turnaround report out, which is what are the thematics around failure? What are the root causes? How do we fix it? Here's a revised critical path. Here's a costed plan to refine it. These are all the steps you need to go through. We normally do that in 10 days, which is quick. So it means is that there's no delay, there's no lag. You're not starting to stall, because that's really, really important. You want to get in, affect some change. But the other thing you want to do is you need to be able to keep it calm. Just because a program's in distress doesn't mean you need to turn it into a soap opera. Okay, invariably you've got really good people in there who are in a really difficult situation, who are trying to work really, really hard, whether that's the program director or the functional consultants or the SI or whoever, or the internal IT organisation. Really good people, normally put in a really difficult situation. The name of the game is to take that burden away and to help them. Invariably, you can't splash cash at a turnaround. You can't go out and bring in a new army. You can't go and get an SI. You have to work with most of the people, assets you've got. So part of the thematic is about being able to take people who are distressed in a difficult situation and to work with them, to mentor them, to upskill them, and to get them to perform better. And that's the art of turnaround, really.
I think that's why your blogs have been so successful. People in the community identify with it. They've experienced with what you're displaying to them. So I think that's definitely why your blogs have been such a success. I know today, obviously, we wanted to go on the topic of SAP's 5X and also the Omniverse. I know you mentioned, obviously, 5X is sort of the biggest inflection point since R3. And those hearing it for the first time, what is 5X and why does it matter so much right now?
Yeah, I think 5X is really important because we've, for the last decade, have been locked into sort of like a cycle in the SAP ecosystem whereby SAP's strategy moving forward has always been about cloud-centric. So they want to become a sort of like a cloud-first organization by the end of 2025, and they've pretty much done that. But most of the thematic around SAP and about revenue growth and about how the ecosystem is going to play out was all around ECC to S4 migrations, essentially. The whole world has been about ECC to S4 migration, nothing else. And the reality has been, over that period, S4 as a product has changed totally. So what we started with and what we've got now are totally different products. During that timescale, we've had the hyperscaler war, where SAP has moved from sort of like an on-prem product into the hyperscalers to RISE, and SAP infrastructure as a service. But 10 years on almost, and 50 to 60% of ECC customers will be on S4 by the end of 2027 per se, but most of those will still be holding ECC as well. So it's a two-tier federated architecture. So ECC hasn't gone anywhere. A lot of ECC customers aren't going anywhere. SAP are now expanding that sort of like offering. So you've got ECC on PCE, BW on PCE. So you stick your ECC onto RISE. And the take up for S4 has been steady, been overwhelmingly sort of like, there's never been a stampede for S4. Writing the benefit case for S4 has always been difficult. Stu Brown from Resulting IT, I think, did the best piece around writing an S4 business case, which was more about how do you visualize the move to S4 opposed to the actual detail within it. Because even today, the S4 PCE 2025, the release document's on, I don't know, 1,300 pages long, loads of innovation in it, but none of it's sort of like groundbreaking. So if you're an ECC and you're looking at it, you're still thinking that's really nice to have, but if my operating model is working well, I don't have process pain, my productivity is really good, and I want to focus elsewhere, why do I need to move to S4? And if you're telling me the only way I can consume AI from SAP is going to be through S4 in the cloud, and I've got AWS, Azure, Google Cloud knocking at my door and saying, guess what? We've got no end of agentic AI products for you. You know what I mean? And you've got Snowflake saying, you don't need to go through DPC, you can go direct. You've got Databricks saying exactly the same. And you get to that point where SAP's run the course on the old strategy. Customers, because of AI, are becoming even more reticent to move to S4 at the moment, just because they want us to wait and see what's going on. And SAP saw that. And SAP are really really savvy. You've got to give it to Christian Klein. Christian Klein's absolutely brilliant. Okay, what a fantastic leader. So you have to listen to what Christian says and then work out what does he really mean. So November investor briefing last year with Q3 last year's results was all about joining the dots. And that's when he started to talk about the re-emergence of the business suite. So we pan forward to January, we get the launch of Business Suite first, AI first, and suddenly it's about SAP saying, we're moving on now. We really don't care so much if the legacy install base move to S4 on cloud. We're not really bothered about the BW install base really moving on to latest versions of BW on HANA. We don't really care anymore because we've got to move forward, and we've invested all this money now in AI and in the other suite products, and now we're investing our money into Sovereign Fortress stack. We need to start driving revenue from there. And also, we're making money from S4 anyway. Companies will move on to S4 at some point. So 5X is very much SAP saying, right, our strategy for the next 5 years growth is very much taking the existing maintenance revenue. So if you look at SAP's P&L and you look at the revenue, a lot of revenue comes in from that install base on BW and ECC and some of the other products. And they're saying, right, to grow revenue, we're going to take that maintenance and we're going to times it by 5. So we're really going to upsell to the install base. So the legacy cash cow ECC BW install base, okay, means more to SAP than net new, because there's not that many net new customers out there who are going to pile into SAP. So now they're realizing, okay, I've got this legacy install base. They've been very, very reticent to buy into SAP products because people like Julia White says, if you're not on the cloud, you can't have AI. People have constantly gone around and say, if you're not clean core, you're stupid. You know, there's been a whole load of ideology which has put barriers in place to the customer saying, I will go S4 on cloud. And the more barriers SAP put into place, the more reticent customers got, and the more customers started to look at other products and look at the hyperscalers and made it easier for the hyperscalers. So example being, at one point in time, if you moved from ECC to S4 and you had HCM, everyone said, well, you've got to go down SuccessFactors route because there's no HCM payroll in S4. And of course, people were going, well, if I've got to do that, will I go and have a look at Workday? And off they trotted and went to Workday. So now we've got S4 HCM, haven't we? So Silent, we've taken our old ECC HCM and payroll, we've hanified it, and it's now into our PC offering. And so SAP have learned from that, but 5X is really about saying, okay, we're now going to upsell the suite and AI to the legacy install base. And to make that happen, we can't put barriers in place. So essentially, it doesn't matter if you're an ECC or BW, you can buy our suite products. Because remember, suite is all about line of business. Okay, so it goes back to that thing about digital Kaizen and about continuous improvement. So if a customer's got a tactical need to do something, where do they go? They go to SAP, and there'll be some products which will enable them going forward. So that's the mindset. There's going to be less rip it out and start again, and then more about the legacy install base consuming SAP products when they need them. And that slowly will create the install base towards BDC and to S4. And so my prediction's been that by 2027, S4 will be totally different. It'll be sort of like a possible agentic, and that will drag the ECC customers along because they'll start to slice up their ECCs and move into S4. And BDC is fantastic. There's so much interest in BDC in comparison to some of the previous products. BW is the foundation for the SAP data fabric. It ain't going nowhere. And most customers' BWs are really hard-coded into their ECCs and legacy S4s. They ain't going to unstitch it. So that's there. So the cornerstone of the data fabric is BW, but BDC really enables that. So again, you'll start to see that legacy BW install base, maybe move their BWs into RISE, so BW PCE, which gives them longevity for support, link it into BDC, which is SaaS, so they're able to just start to use sort of like commoditized BDC products when they need them. You're starting to get that upsell. So legacy BW using BDC, using a bit of SAC. Yeah. That's how the SAP are going to monetize themselves going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like obviously a very strategic move by SAP to go with this sort of 5x approach. And you kind of already answered my next question in terms of, X is going to, mark the end of the rip out and start again era. I mean, you've already highlighted what it means for the customers, but how does this shift or reshape the services and sort of the ecosystem?
I think it's interesting because I think there's been such a slowdown in major SAP implementation anyway. Most of the SIs are sort of like recalibrated. I think the biggest loser to the switch will be the offshore Indian SIs because their models are so geared to sort of like, body shops all over the place. The AI coming in is very much going to enable the shift of customers from ECC to S or to leverage BDC. So you're going to see a lot more AI enabled delivery. So you'll need far fewer junior people on a program. So I think your implementation teams are going to get a lot smaller. So the major SIs from a core implementation perspective will shrink. But I think from an advisory perspective, I don't think there's any change. You're talking about your traditional four-man brick team in terms of a program director, a good enterprise architect, maybe technical architect, and a PMO. I mean, you put those people in, that's what you really need to drive a customer going forward. And then you just call the resources you need it. So you're going to get a very fractional model going forward. There'll be far less land and expand big teams on site, more fractional continuous improvement delivery, which I think works well. And so over time, you're going to get sort of like ECC customers. I'm working with one at the moment who's got 6 legacy ECC instances globally, right? Who don't want to move to S4 yet. Okay, but want to do stuff.
Yeah.
So there's a really good example of customer will want to move to maybe a public cloud S4 instance, establish a new common template, and lob all their acquisitions on there. Also, start to look at BDC, start to look at group reporting because BPC is going out. So the whole point of the Omniverse is that there'll be a lot more wider spread of continuous improvement projects right across the suite, the line of business. So it's going to be lots of smaller, more focused delivery, but it's going to be a lot of it. So it's a shift. So it's a shift from big rip it out and start again, but a lot more continuous improvement, a lot more bimodal stuff going on, a lot of projects. So it's more portfolio, less big bang.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I was about to go on to the Omniverse because that's obviously a really exciting topic. You've been writing about it a lot recently in your blogs. And I was going to go into how you would describe it, but also why you believe it's the only viable path to realizing the strategy.
I think so. The thematic behind the Omniverse started about 4 or 5 years ago when we really started to see the reluctance of SAP customers to embrace S4 and also some of the other products, but having a first continuous improvement. So they started to look at working more and more with the hyperscalers. And starting to see a lot more bolt-ons like Cooper right across the ecosystem. So you're starting to see a lot of SAP customers moving away from core ERP and doing bolt-ons, and not using BTP as Enterprise Service Bus, but using things like MuleSoft. So it started to get a little bit busy in terms of customers were turning away from SAP because they were being put off by the model, but they were still doing continuous improvement. So they were still doing plug and play. And it became really clear through observation for customers who are upcycling their SAP investment. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to sweat their SAP asset. The constant thematic for me is there's no tech debt in a legacy SAP architecture if you're still using it. There's no tech debt in customizations if you still use them. There's no tech debt in that at all. It's actually the best thing a CFO is ever going to see, because instead of sort of like that 4-year cycle, you're 10, 15 years into your SAP estate, you're 15, 20 years into your ISFW, and it's still returning benefits. That's a massive return of investment. That's fantastic. Ticking the box for SAP. But you're starting to see this thing about upcycling, about leveraging you're sweating your SAP asset to start off with. Then you started to see the rise of starting to see microservices coming out from BTP. So it's like more and more SAP build, starting to see the construct of BTP as sort of like the ABAP Foundry sidecar, all this type of stuff. Customers starting to use things like Slack, more plug and play. You started to see this fact that ERP and BW were the foundations of the enterprise architecture per se, both from a technology stack, but from an operating model perspective as well. But everyone was trying to innovate using non-SAP stuff. Then the 5X piece is actually saying, do you know what? SAP are by a country mile leading the enterprise AI revolution at the moment. I did a blog recently about how MIT had said 95% of AI is junk, enterprise AI is junk, but SAP are in that 5% bucking the trend. So SAP are absolutely leading the drive for AI. At the same time, BDC is driving out the agentic data fabric. Then suddenly there's a lot of interest from customers. And so suddenly customers want to experiment with AI. They want to experiment with BDC, but they don't want to rip it out and start again. So the Omniverse is basically saying, going forwards, SAP is about leveraging the past and the present. Okay. So it's leveraging your legacy architecture to act as the foundation for those elements of the new stuff you want to leverage. And so it's a far more complex model now, so that an SAP customer will have ECC on RISE, might have a bit of S4 public, might have a bit of CX, might have a bit of success factors, might have a bit of business network. It's really complex. There'd be some on-prem, some on cloud, some on hyperscaler, and the customer can really pretty much choose what they want to do, because they're going to call off SAP services. They're going to call it off. The Omniverse is that your core foundation is going to be there, whether it's on ECC or BW, but you are just going to basically call on and consume SAP service after SAP service going forward, all in the cloud, all agentic, and that's how SAP are going to drive that 5x revenue. They're not going to be obsessed about, is the customer on ECC? They're going to be obsessed about driving revenue. They're not going to be obsessed about, the customer being on legacy BW. If that customer wants to use BDC now, immediately, wants to open up the tenant and get it going. Yeah.
One thing I was going to ask, Alisdair, when going on to the AI topics you were discussing, and obviously the increase of the AI agents, and I know you've got your own AI tools that you use at Dragon ERP. But I mean, how are these AI agents becoming central to your thinking? And how are they going to change the way that SAP programs are designed, delivered, and actually sustained?
It's a really good question, because I saw a quote the other day from Christian Klein when he was talking to investors about what will Q4 look like and what will the final year-end results look like. And he basically said, well, Q4 and year-end really depends upon AI adoption. Okay, so SAP have put all their eggs into the AI bag now, and quite rightly so. So I think the move to Suite was really fantastic, right? Because it goes back to SAP being an operating model, and the Suite touches every part of the operating model. Okay, so SAP becomes a holistic product, and then with AI built in all over the place, and it's end to end. So you're talking about end-to-end processes going across multiple SAP products. I think that customers are very receptive to AI. I think that I was interested that SAP actually picked up on my 95% of AI was junk blog, and they were in their 5% because they reused that, which I felt was amazing. The biggest problem SAP have got now in the AI space is about, and I've been talking to a lot of people about this over the last few weeks, is about getting the customers confident enough to actually use it. And that's interesting, because we use AI a lot in Dragon, right? We've got our own AI toolkit, which we use, and we embrace that because we saw that SAP were pushing out some metrics. They were able to they were able to increase productivity by 40% within their finance organization using Joule, because SAP have actually implemented Joule themselves this year in the finance space. Okay, as part of that reorganization, the global reorganization of SAP, and they were talking about the fantastic benefits they drove out using Joule. We use AI. I think the blog I've just put out about the ghost in the SAP AI cockpit sort of talks about this thing about trust and about humans need to understand how AI works and what it's going to do for them before they can really embrace it. So we're seeing a lot of resistance at the moment by big organizations to really dive into AI en masse. But I don't think that's a problem, because if you work on the basis that rip it out and start again is a bad thing, and we don't want to do that. SAP will not tell a client that they can't use AI unless they're an S4 PCE 2025, because that would be silly. They're going to work with the client to leverage as best the customer can. So the way forward is about experimenting with AI. So what we're seeing is customers will want to experiment with AI. So it means they'll have a very neat governance methodology about building out the guardrails around AI, taking it through the design authority so everyone understands it, doing the design, and then having some form of architecture so that they can do their pilots in terms of AI. Some organizations will embrace dual. Get on with it. The early adopters will.
I was just going to say, I think for the SAP to try and speed up that adoption, the main thing is education and confidence. So if they can sort of speak to their customers and educate them how to use it, make them feel confident using it, do you think that's going to be the main way to speed up that adoption process?
Yeah, I think there's two ways. One, the early adopters, the global 2000, there's 96 out of the global 100 run SAP, and then the 92% of the global 2000 run SAP. They will traditionally embrace that anyway. So they'll be all over it. Got a customer who was already into large language models a year before SAP even started to talk about it. But the upshot is that they're with a hyperscaler doing it, not with SAP. But SAP are up there in terms of enterprise AI. They're up there. They're ahead of the curve. So I think it's a twofold piece. There's the bit about the early adopters doing it for real and being some really, really clear reference sites, ticking the box there. I think you also then got the rise of the enterprise architects within the SAP sales team. So again, SAP is a vendor. They want to make money out of you. The enterprise architects have got a thematic, which is all things must end with SAP in a sentence. Okay. But even so, the enterprise architects will help the customers understand how they can drive value. But I think it's really incumbent upon the SAP ecosystem to really get into the mindset of AI adoption is dependent upon experimentation, and therefore the early AI projects should all be small bits of continuous improvement to the side, just showing the customer how AI adds value, how they work with it, how they service it. Yeah, that's how it's going to move forward. It will move forward very, very quickly, but over the next year, it's going to be about experimentation and the customers just finding their way in terms of how to embrace, embed, and sustain.
Yeah, perfect. And I mean, I was just thinking that coming back to the way that, sort of 5X is going to mark a major shift away from big system integrators towards smaller boutique firms. I mean, and you've already discussed what's driving that change, but how should customers and sort of partners prepare for this?
I think there's one other point, just to go back to your previous point, just in terms of training piece, was just don't forget about WalkMe as well. So the acquisition of WalkMe and embedding it into Dual, is sort of like groundbreaking in terms of having that agentic learning training tool built into the AI Copilot, so that you're making it far easier for the user to embrace. So that's important. But I think in terms of the ecosystem, and sort of like getting ready, I find that needs to spend more time in the detail behind the SAP products and what the value proposition is, and really starting to understand the customers better. Okay, because you should be able to understand the customer, not in terms of what lager they drink when you take it to Twickenham in your VIP box. Okay, because that doesn't drive any value. Because I'm sick about hearing about how the SIs take people out on away days. It has no value whatsoever. But really understanding how their customer's operating model really works. I was asked by a customer recently who stopped their S4 program mid-flight. Their first question they asked was, once we get underway, what should we be thinking about in terms of AI? As an example, what should we be thinking about in terms of suite? And the only way you can really answer that is not by understanding SAP product bases, but really understanding the customer. So you really must have a deep understanding of the customer's operating model, how they really work, how they operate, process orchestration, where the process pain points. You really need to understand the customer so that you automatically can associate the SAP product to the value proposition. You do not need an army of SAP consultants to go in and spend a month to drive out a value proposition. You should be able to go like that. It's as simple as that. The ecosystem needs to spend more time understanding the customer and less time attending SAP away days and things which had no value whatsoever. If you notice, I don't go to many. because they're just circle jerks. They had no value whatsoever. Get into the detail, understand the client, because the detail's changing constantly. I mean, that's the thing.
In these away days, they're probably not talking much about the future of SAP or the strategic.
No, I mean, no one in SAP's sales organisation is going to talk about X and the fact that they've spent years soliciting the install base for not going clean core and moving to S4, only to suddenly have to go and be their best buddies to upsell to them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's a difficult pill to swallow, I would imagine, for some of those sales execs. You know, what one would say to the ecosystem, focus less on ideologies and more about what the customer really wants.
Yeah. 100%. And I was going to say your post recently have been really successful. A lot of people have been sharing them. And one of the posts that I saw, you mentioned tactical is the new strategic.
Yeah.
I mean, can you unpack that and explain that to the audience?
Yeah. So I'm an enterprise architect, and we love to do long-term roadmaps, don't we? We do this whole thing about understanding customers as his enterprise architecture and operating model, visualizing it, and then with our roadmaps, year on year, showing that shunt in terms of that TOGAF enterprise architecture. It's all great stuff, but the reality is that by 2030, the S4 product will be totally different. You're talking about thinking ERP. You're really talking about robotics would have landed really in the workplace. You're talking about dual being at MES between robotic hive and ERP. So you're talking about cognitive ERP, robotics. You're at that point just before the iPhone dropped, where we're still using Blackberries, right? And then think how quickly the world changed once the iPhone dropped, because you're going to see robots dropping next year into the workplace all over the place. Just, you know, I've got a blog on the company website at the moment talking about thinking ERP, which I haven't put out on LinkedIn because it was just too complex and theoretical, and I just thought no one would understand it, especially most of the SAP SI, so I didn't put it out there. But it's moving so quickly. There's no point anymore in thinking strategic. There's absolutely no point anymore thinking strategic. You have to think about the perma crisis, everything we've been in, you know, since 2020. Things are geopolitically, things are changing constantly. Look at the last 3 months in terms of the cloud. Suddenly we've got sovereign AI, sovereign cloud, now sovereign stack, and now we're going to move towards sovereign AMS. We didn't talk about that 3 months ago. A year ago, we weren't really talking about the agentic AI. You know, so you can't really develop a strategy which goes further than 18 months. That's it. It's all tactical. So you really have to go back to the organization and say, right, okay, what are the current drivers? So what are the innovation drivers? Where are your pain points? What do you need to fix today, which will drive immediate value? Because product singularity, so tech singularity, moving forward so quickly that by 2030, ERP robotics will have changed the enterprise totally. So there's no point doing a 4 or 5 year plan taking you out to 2030 because you've got no idea what's going to be out there. So you just might as well focus on the here and now. Right? An 18-month view is about as far as you can go now. And it also goes back to something else I've been writing for a customer at the moment, which is the difference between transformation and maintenance. Okay. There used to be a thing which said it. I'm really old, so I've been in this ecosystem for far too long. But traditionally, most CIOs would bake into the plan that every 4 to 5 years you'd have to do a major SAP upgrade. So SAP's TCO was always based upon the fact that every 5 years you'd have to do an upgrade. You didn't know why you'd have to do the upgrade because the technology wasn't there yet and you hadn't moved into it, but you just knew. So you could be an old 4.6e customer sitting there not knowing that ECC 6 was over the horizon. But because you factored in that every 4 or 5 years you could do a major upgrade, when ECC 6 landed and SRM 7 landed or BW, whatever landed, you actually had the pot to actually go out and do it. So a lot of what's going on in the ecosystem in terms of the need to move to S4, the demise of APO, the changes to GTS, the demise of store like BPC, the rise of group reporting, IBP, all this stuff, you know, the demise of PIPO. Most of what's going on is about maintenance. It's about just uplifting your platform opposed to innovation, because the investment and time just to do that maintenance piece precludes the transformation because everything's moved on. So there is a bit which says, look, a lot of that 18-month roadmap will be split between the tactical things you need to do to drive innovation, okay, to improve productivity, EBITDA and liquidity, tangible stuff, which has real benefits. And then the stuff you've got to do, which is just box standard maintenance. And there's a difference between the two. Because customers will move to S4 because they need to from a maintenance perspective, because maybe their APO has been demised, or if they want to do something with GTS. Most of those moves to S4 are driven by a proper business case, not because they need to from a maintenance perspective. But there's a split between transformation and maintenance, and that's been blurred over the last decade.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you've done so many amazing different blogs and writes that I'd highly recommend anybody watching to have a look at Alisdair's blogs that he posts on LinkedIn and also on Dragon ERP. Yeah, it kind of brings me to my final question for you, Alisdair. You know, talking around the Omniverse and 5X. If SAP truly delivers on 5X and the Omniverse, that sort of vision, what do you think the ERP landscape will look like, 5 years from now? I know it is hard to predict, and what will separate the winners from those who sort of get left behind in this process?
Actually, I think the first point is I don't think many people are going to get left behind. Okay. I did an interview about 3 years ago for a magazine where I talked about the fact that exponentially AI would, as a tool, become more prevalent in the implementation space. And the more the SIs invested in AI tooling and automation, the greater the take up to S4 would be. And I still stand behind that. And I still believe that the investment by the SIs in terms of sort of like transformation tooling is pretty poor. I mean, it beggars belief why so many data migrations are an absolute clusterfuck. It's just unbelievable. But it's the same, it's the usual suspects, isn't it? So you've always got to ask yourself, why do I go out to the usual suspects when they all fail? But that's enough of a conversation. So I actually don't think people are going to get left behind, because I actually think the tooling is going to be there to enable SAP to recognize the revenue on the install base by taking the install base to the promised land. And so like that promised land by 2030 will be a totally different flavor of S4. It'd be sort of like your composable agentic ERP solution, totally carved up around that line of business piece. So it will be embedded in the suite, but the ease of getting there will be totally different. It's going to be a very AI enabled process. In the same way as we said that massive productivity gains by SAP's finance organization by adopting Joule. They're also saying that there's a 40% reduction level of effort by SIs using Joule consulting, the consultant flavor of Joule. So one would imagine that as we move forward to 2030, the tooling will be placed to take everybody to where they need to be. And there's no reason why. I mean, if you want to drive revenue from your new agentic S4 solution sitting there, in your sovereign stack, why would you not make it easy for the customer to get there? The only reason they've not embraced S4 is because it's just too hard to get there. Yeah. Too many barriers. Make it easy. It's simple. Make it easy for the customer. They will buy it by the bucket loads. There's nothing wrong with SAP as a product. It's just getting there and being able to embed and sustain the change. WalkMe enables you to embed and sustain the change now. Okay, so that's fair, but it's just how do you get the customer to migrate? So we're going to see slicker migration going forward.
That's great, Alisdair. I mean, thank you so much for coming on to the ERP perspective. Got so much insight and knowledge around SAP. I'd highly recommend anybody in my network to give Alisdair a follow and also follow his community pages and his blogs. Is there anything else, Alisdair, that you'd like to share with the community before we wrap this episode up?
I'm not doing tons and tons of blogging about loads of SAP stuff. I've got a blog out there at the moment, AI Guardrails. I haven't published it on LinkedIn because I want to do some more work on it. It's on my website, but I'm not particularly happy. I think there's more to go into it. So when I'm happy with it, because I don't think the AI guardrails which are in place actually work. I think I'm really, really, really infused about, I did some blogging a couple of years ago where I talked about data alchemy, where I basically did a blog called, I think it was BW and duct tape, how to build your data fabric using legacy BW. Because I think I was taking the piss out of DataSphere at the time, which is a product was awful. So I think BDC is really fantastic. And the whole way in which we use sort of like a legacy BW as that foundation for the intelligent data fabric. And I think the other thing we're really focusing on is what we call in the hit squad, which is going back into SAP customers who are running SAP, who have got problems in terms of their BAU instances at the moment. And just this piece about going as a hit squad and how to actually remove some of the productivity bottlenecks, deal with some of the process orchestration issues, just to get their ERP system spinning a bit better, just to again improve the investment in what they've got. So it's not about re-implementation, not about land and expand, not about ripping out. It's about going in and actually just fixing some of the problems they've got, just so that their current investment works better. And I think the other thematic, which is really interesting, is that I've had to do a load of work for ourselves in terms of building out our own cyber and GDPR strategies and stuff. And as part of that, because we do a lot of work for the public sector, had to build out a cyber continuity plan. But in doing that, we worked out a proper business continuity plan for mid-tier companies. And out of that really fell the need for SOPs, standard operating procedures. Okay, so just really interested in terms of all of those SAP customers who got hacked recently, and why do they get hacked? The root cause behind the hacking, but more importantly, what does the continuity plan look like? How can you have a situation like JLR where it stopped for 3 weeks, couldn't make cars? Or you've got a situation like M&S have written off 600 million and you know couldn't take online orders for 6 months. Where is the continuity planning? Where are the SOPs? So we're doing some thematic about that at the moment, about how we can offer that as a service.
That's great. I mean, like I said, buddy in my network who's in the SAP community, I'd highly recommend following Alisdair. But yeah, this has been the ERP Perspective with Alisdair Bach from Dragon ERP. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.